Well, this is a pretty typical day on the waterfront. Here we are in Beacon Bay Marina in Penetanguishene, Ontario, and there's quite a stiff breeze blowing, and that can really make docking a challenge. So this week on my boat, we're going to install something that makes docking a real snap. This week we're going to work on installing a bow thruster from Sideshift.
The Sideshift kit contains all of the components the installation requires, except battery cables, additional battery terminals, batteries, and marine sealant. To get the job done, you'll need a drill and drill bits, a hole saw, a power driver, wrenches, screwdrivers, an Allen key, a wire cutter, a stripper, and crimpers, a caulking gun, and a hacksaw. First, the clamp strap was positioned between 2 and 6 inches above the waterline, and the holes to be drilled were marked. Having confirmed there was adequate clearance inside the hull, the pilot holes were drilled using a 5/16 or 8mm bit. The final hole size was made with a 1/2 inch or 13mm bit. Using a caulking gun, the supplied epoxy was applied to the hull inserts and to the holes. Then the inserts were slid into place. Additional epoxy was also applied around the inserts on the inside of the hull. After the epoxy cured, I removed the bolts with a 3/16 Allen key and trimmed any excess epoxy. Marine sealant such as Sikaflex was applied around the holes in the clamp strap. The strap was then set into place and the bolts secured. The nut and washer were removed, then the thruster was slid over the bolt and the washer and nut installed. These were then tightened just enough to hold the thruster against the boat.
One of the key things when you're positioning the thruster is the propellers have to be a minimum of 5 inches below the waterline. So we'll take a measurement here, and we're at 6. So this particular position is good for the final mounting.
Next, holes had to be drilled for the 2 power cables and air vent line. After feeding the power cables and vent lines in through the hull, I applied a generous amount of sealant and worked it into each hole. Cutting off the mounting bolt with a hacksaw or reciprocating saw, the upper section of the thruster was slid into place and the side screws installed. Finally, a hole was drilled in the top bolt, which was then inserted and sealant applied to the bolt. Last, I installed a washer and lock nut inside the hull.
Well, that takes care of the heavy-duty mechanical parts of this installation, and there's not a lot. As long as you're confident doing some good measurements and drilling some holes in your boat, it's a fairly straightforward project. But now we're going to move to the inside and start tackling the electrical side of this project.
Inside the boat is where these projects take the most time. The platform in the forward berth had to be unscrewed and shifted to allow access to the thruster cables and vent to run them up to the anchor locker. Then I had to run the main battery cables from the anchor locker in the bow to the location of the batteries under the forward berth. Cables were also run for the charging circuit for the batteries.
Well, we've had all the trials and tribulations of getting the cable run underneath the berth area to where the batteries are going to go. So our next task is to wire up the control unit and the motors. So what we've got here is double-aught cables that are coming from our batteries. We've got the cables that are going to go from the control unit to the motors, and we have some 4-gauge cables here that we're going to tie into the windless that's going to allow charge circuit to come through for the batteries. So let's get started.
After stripping the cables, slipping on a couple of inches of heat shrink, and installing the compression terminals, the cables were connected to the motor control unit, following the detailed instructions and drawings provided.
Now this is all the wiring you do if you're doing a standard installation that has a hard-wired joystick at the helm. The only other thing you would do here would be to connect the wires that come down from the joystick. Now we've opted for the wireless control, so what we're going to do now is take the receiver box, hook it to these switch points, and power it up from the battery terminals.
After securing terminal covers over the connections, I mounted the motor control unit on the bulkhead inside the anchor locker and attached the receiver to the unit with double-sided tape. Inside the locker, the positive and negative power cables for charging the batteries were connected to the windless power supply at the control solenoid. Next, battery trays were installed under the berth where a drawer had been removed. The batteries were then set in place and secured. I selected sealed marine AGM batteries to ensure there would be no safety concerns with leaks or off-gassing. Finally, I installed the terminals on the battery cables and connected the power and charging cables to the positive terminal of battery 1 and the negative terminal of battery 2. A jumper cable was used to wire the two batteries in parallel. At the helm, I selected position for the joystick, applied the template, and drilled the holes for the mounting studs. Next, a 2.5-inch hole saw was used to cut the opening in the helm.
What we're gearing up to install here, obviously, is the joystick control for the system, but there's something new that Sideshift has added to their system, and that's the wireless capability package here. This is a wireless transmitter that's going to plug into the joystick, so there's no wiring to run down to the control unit, and as well, there's a key fob in here, so you can move about the boat and control the bow thruster.
After setting the joystick in place, it was secured with the mounting studs from under the helm. Moving on, the transmitter's positive power wire was connected to the hot side of one of the ignitions and the negative to a negative bus bar. Finally, it was secured in place with zip ties and plugged into the back of the joystick. With the C-ray back together and all cleaned up, it was time to launch so I could try out the new Sideshift SS340. Needless to say, the performance of the bow thruster was impressive. The boat spun easily and docking was a cinch, even in a stiff breeze.
Well, that wraps up another MyBoat project. I'd rate this one a 5 out of 5. It's fairly difficult. It's taken us 2 days to put it together and film it, but the benefits are awesome. And the new remote controls you find with the Sideshift system are fantastic, especially if you're solo docking.